Hey guys, how's it going? It's Jay, and today I have the Nikon Z6 III, and we're going to go over it in a beginner's guide style. So I'm going to start off, very basic, show you how to put the battery in there, stuff like that, memory card, and then I'm going to go over the camera body like in detail, explain what the buttons, are and so forth. And then we're going to actually turn the camera on and go through the initial like basic setup type stuff. So we're going to start very simple. We're going to start in full auto mode for those beginners out there, and I'll show you how the camera works in that mode. Then we'll switch to program auto, which is very similar to auto mode, but you get more power, and I'll just show you that quick. Then we're going to switch to the much more powerful modes, like we have aperture, shutter speed, and full-fledged manual mode. So I'm going to show you guys that as well. And once we get into the more advanced modes, like I pretty much use aperture priority mode most of the time. So I'm going to show you how I have the camera set up for, my purposes. Like I've been using this thing for like at least probably 20 days now. And I had to change a bunch of settings like to make the camera like work well for me. I did change a couple of things in the customization area, and I'm going to show you guys that because I think it'll really help you out. So below the video, guys, there'll be timestamps where I'll have like the basic concepts separated into chapters sort of thing. So you can skip ahead, guys. If you don't need to know the very, very beginner stuff, you could skip ahead and get to the more advanced stuff. So first off, I just wanted to thank BH Photo for letting me borrow the Nikon Z6 III kit that I have here. So thank you very much to BH Photo. They're a really awesome store for your photo and video needs. I will have links below in the description area. Highly recommend you check them out. All right, guys, let's get right into it. So starting off here, this is what comes in the box. So we got the neck strap here. Now, I'm not going to put the neck strap on right now, but you could basically weave this through these little eyelets. Now we have the USB-C charging cable right here. It did not come with a charger, so this did not come with a wall charger. I will have one linked below in the description area. I got a really affordable one from Anker that's perfect. So, and you could use it for PD power as well. That'll be linked below in the description, as well as another cable if you want a longer one. Now, this thing is the cable like route holder. So basically what it does is it screws onto the side here, and if you're using USB-C cables and HDMI cables and so forth, and you don't want to put stress on the camera or the cables, that's what this is for. You can actually weave the cables through here, and then if anything were ever tugged, it would tug, on the cable itself and not like the actual where it plugs into the camera. So this is a really nice tool if you are using multiple cables in a studio environment, for example. Now, we also have the battery here. So this is the Nikon battery, as you can see here. We'll put that in a moment. We also have a user manual. Now, this is a pretty nice user manual. A lot of times the print is so small you can't really read it, but as you can see here, it's actually not that bad. You could read the text, and it's got all the basic information in this manual, which is very nice. I like having like a tangible, something you could read and hold up. I usually use the online manuals, don't get me wrong, but I do greatly appreciate a manual coming with the camera. So nice work on Nikon's part there. I also got this kit with the 24 to 70 millimeter f4s lens. This is a very good lens. I really like it. The image quality is awesome coming off this lens. It really performed well. The build quality feels excellent on this lens also. Nikon makes really good lenses. I've used several over the past like few years, and I'm really impressed with their optics. They really do make well-built, high-quality lenses. All right, guys, so let's go over this camera body a little bit. So what we have here is the mode dial. Now, you can't turn the mode dial because it has this lock button, so you have to actually push this with your finger, and then you can turn the mode dial. Now, right here on the top, you have stereo mics. You can see those little holes on the top there. Those are the stereo mics. Now right here, it's hard to see, but you have a focal plane marker. You could see it right there, and there's that little speaker next to it. That focal plane marker is basically where the front of the sensor is. So if you need to measure, for manual focus or macro photography and stuff like that, that's where you would measure from, that focal plane line. Now you got a video record button right here. You have an ISO button, which stands for sensor sensitivity, ISO. Then you have exposure compensation. So this button will allow you to lower the exposure or raise the exposure if you want, depending on what mode you're in. Now here you have the on and off toggle, as you can see here, and then you have the shutter release button right here. Now this is a two-stage button, so you can press it to focus and then press it all the way to take the photo. Now right here, you have the main command dial. Right here with your thumb. And then right here, you have the sub command dial. This little button here is the illuminator for this control panel here. And this control panel will give you like key information as to what the camera is set to, so you don't have to actually look at the screen. You can just look at that and, you know, see where it is. Now up here we have the accessory shoe where you can put flash units and stuff like that. You can also put on-camera mics and things like that into the hot shoe. Now on the side of the EVF here, you have a monitor button. That's what this does, and that will basically cycle between the different monitor modes. So you can have it just use the electronic viewfinder, for example, or you can have it switch between the viewfinder and the monitor. Now, they're calling the monitor the LCD screen on the back, just so you know. So that's what this button does. It'll just change the configuration. You can have it set to just the LCD screen only, just the EVF only, or you can have it a combination of both and so forth. Now, if you look right here, this is the AF illuminator, and this is used for helping the camera focus in really low light. It also will blink when you're using self-timer, and it will also help you when you're using red eye reduction and with flash and stuff like that. Now, this white dot here is the lens mount mark. This is the body cap. And if we take this off, you can see here, that is the sensor. So that is the awesome partially stacked sensor. Now this button right here is the lens release button. And you can see that pin, that steel pin moving up and down. That's what locks the lens on. And then over here you have a function 1 button and a function 2 button. Also note the electrical contacts. That's how your lens talks to the camera. So looking at the port side here, we have a little charging light up there, and that will light up when the camera is charging or when the battery is charging when you have a power cord in there. I'll show you that in a second. So you have these nice rubber doors. They're very nice. They really good weather sealing. I like how these rubber doors work. They can be kind of annoying when you have them off. They can get in the way a little bit and block the LCD screen, but you just kind of got to move them where you want them. But anyways, up here you have a USB-C port, so that's where you would charge the camera, and you can also transfer photos on and off with that. You got a full-size HDMI here, and then down here, they call it an accessory terminal. And then over here, we have the mic port, and then we have the headphone port. And also note up there on the top, there's that little hole. That's to screw this thing on. See how that has a screw right there? That screw will thread into that hole right there. And that's how this thing is held on. All right, so looking over here at the grip side, what you do here is you can slide that back and then it pops open. And now we have 2 card slots. So you have a CF Express Type B card slot up here towards the top of the camera. And then here you have an SD card slot, a UHS-2 SD card. Now I'm gonna put the SD card in now. This is the card that I like to use. Pro grade. Now they come in different sizes, but I usually go for the 128. They're a little bit cheaper. 256 would definitely be a better option if you are recording a lot of video though. So anyways, that just goes in here like so. Slides in with the logos and stuff facing you. And then it clicks in. To take it out, you just click it and it'll pop out. And then you can close that and then lock it back into place. So now the memory card is in there. So looking at the back side, we got the monitor or the LCD screen here. Now, of course, this swivels out and it swivels like this, so you can use it in selfie mode if you have the camera facing this way. And you can also have it this way if you have the camera very low to the ground, or you can have it this way if the camera is like over your head. So I really like the swivel screen. It makes it much easier to use in hard situations. You know, think like on a gimbal, or again, very low to the ground or over your head and stuff like that, and also selfie mode. So I really like the flip screen, and I also like that you can close it and have it in armor mode here is what I call it, so you won't scratch the screen when you stow the camera. So I always recommend leaving it like this when you put the camera away. Now up here we have a delete button, so that's how you can delete photos and delete stuff from the My Menu area and stuff like that. So over here you have the release mode button. It's also called the drive modes on Sony cameras in case you're coming from Sony. So that's where like self-timer is and continuous shooting and stuff like that. In the playback menu, this acts as like a protection for photos that you like. That's what that little key is for. Now here you got the viewfinder. That's what this is. And up here, that little thing is the sensor for the viewfinder. So if you have something too close to the viewfinder, it'll switch to the viewfinder. So for example, if you have the camera like close to your chest like this and you're trying to look at the LCD screen, the viewfinder might get set off because that sensor is seeing something too close to it. So keep that in mind. That's what that sensor does. And that's a reason why you might want to use this monitor button, just to turn off the EVF if you're doing something like that. Because I do notice with this camera quite a few times, when I'm using it, it switches to the EVF because that sensor is getting tripped during, various things. So I have to like move the camera in some way so it stops doing that. But you could just toggle this button to shut the EVF off in situations like that. Now this turn thing here is called the diopter, and you can adjust that for your vision with the EVF. So if you're looking through the EVF and it's looking blurry, turn this dial until you can get it nice and sharp. Now right here you have a display button. See this display button here? This will cycle through the different display modes when you're looking at the LCD screen or the electronic viewfinder. So there's different options and tools that you can utilize by pressing the display mode. So if you're looking at the LCD screen and you're not seeing information on the outside or something like that, it's probably because you hit the display mode button. So just hit that button a few times and it'll cycle through. I'll show you when we turn the camera on. This is also the toggle between photo mode and video mode, like that. Now this is the AF on button, and when you press this, it'll just lock the autofocus. I actually have it custom configured for 3D tracking because I use the shutter button to focus. But if you're a back button focus person, this is a really great feature. It's already set up to lock the AF for you, so that's pretty cool. Below that, we have a joystick, which is pretty sweet. You can move the focus area around with this joystick. Now below that you have the I menu, which is very similar to a function menu on the Sony cameras or the Q menu on the Canon cameras. Then below that you have a directional pad here, which you could see up, down, left, right, and so forth. Then you have the OK button, which you use all the time in the menu and so forth. Now right next to the I menu button here, you have a memory card access lamp, and what that means is when you're writing data to the memory card, that will light up. So if you see that light lit, do not pull the memory card. You'll lose the data. You know what I'm saying? So that's why that light's there, just to let you know it's writing to the card. You'll see it lit a lot when you're doing continuous shooting because that just fills up the buffer and then it has to write the files to the card. So if you're wondering why that's flashing, that's what's going on there. Now down here we have the playback button, we have the menu button, and then we have a playback zoom out button and a playback zoom in button. In addition, this bottom button here will act as a question mark, you can see there. So when you're in the menu looking at certain items, you'll see a little question mark pop up. That's how you know you can hit this button and it'll give you more information. So there's so many powerful features in this camera, and they're not always named so obvious as to what they do. So you can hit this question mark button and get a little more information, which is very helpful in a lot of scenarios. So looking at the bottom of the camera, we have the tripod socket here. Now looking at the battery door, I really like this battery door, and you know why? Because it auto locks. Watch this. It just locks. You don't have to actually slide it back over. So I'm a huge fan of that. For some reason, the Sony cameras don't have auto-locking doors, and it drives me crazy. My super old Canons back in the day had auto-locking doors, so it's always been a pet peeve of mine. But anyway, let's throw the battery in there. So the battery actually goes in like this. So you can just slide it like so, and then it locks down. And notice that yellow lever there? That's what's holding it in. So if you just push the yellow lever, the battery will pop up because there's a spring down there. So that's how that works. And you can just push that down and it auto locks. So let me just show you how to charge this really quick now that we got the battery in there. So I have this plugged into a PD power source, and I have my own cable here. So I'm just going to plug that in. So you can see there the charging light is now lit orange. So it's charging. It's kind of hard to see with this door flapping around. Oh, there we go. So you can see that charging light, and that'll go out when the camera is fully charged. So I'm going to leave that plugged in for a little bit because I don't want it dying on me during this tutorial here. Alright guys, so I just want to take a moment here to thank the sponsor of this video, which is you. That's right. You guys are the sponsor of this video. You guys are the ones watching. You guys are the ones asking questions and leaving comments down in the comments section, which not only help me, it helps other people trying to learn the camera. So that's just fantastic that you guys do that. Also, you guys are the ones that go into the description area and click those affiliate links, which greatly helps me out. So thank you very much for doing that. I really appreciate it. And thank you very much for sponsoring this video. All right, guys, so before we turn this on, I just want to mount the lens up. So let me show you how to do that. Just going to unscrew the body cap here. And then we got the lens. Take that lens cap off. And now you'll see on the lens itself, it has like a white dot, and that white dot will match up to the white dot on the flange right here, the Z-mount flange. So let's marry those up like so, and then we twist and it locks into place. And you heard that click? That click was this lens pin here. So if we hit this button here, remember this is the lens release button, we could now untwist the lens and take it off. And listen for the click. And now it's locked into place. See how there's like no movement? So that is how we mount the lens. Now we got the lens cap here, and then we have the lens hood. So I always recommend putting the lens hood on when using it, because if you bump the front of the lens, you're much more protected and things like that, even if you're inside. But generally this is for, like, you know, to protect the sun flare and glare and things like that, but also look at it as a protective aid. So I would recommend leaving this on. I'm just going to take it off for this demonstration though, because I want the camera to sit a little bit flatter like this. Let's pull the LCD panel out, unplug the charger. I'm going to swivel this up a little bit. And now if we turn this on, you will see it's just telling you to rotate the lens. So this lens actually does have a more compact off position. You can see right here on that dot, that's where we're at. So it's telling us we need to turn the lens. Now it's ready to use. Now we're at 24 millimeter. And if we zoom, that's all the way to 70 millimeter. So yeah, you have to turn this to zoom. In case you guys are unaware, this is a zoom lens, f4 constant aperture zoom lens. So that's where we're at when it comes to the lens. All right, so first thing we want to do, I'll show you what happens if we're in photo mode. So if you press the shutter button, it's going to focus automatically, and it's actually focusing on the eye. If I zoom in a little bit, you'll see it a little better. See it on the eye there? And that's pretty much how that works. It's just by default going to focus on the eye if you press, and then if you press all the way, it'll take the photo. So let me show you a couple of things in the menu area that you really need to set up first though before you start using the camera. If you go into the menu here, we're going to go down into the setup area. And first thing we're going to want to do is format the memory card, because you might have had this memory card in another camera, for example, so there might be another database on the memory card. So best practice is to format the memory card when you put it in. Now, of course, if there's photos on that memory card, you don't want to format it, it'll delete those photos. So keep that in mind. Make sure it's a card that you already took the photos off of and so forth. So anyways, I'm just going to format this memory card. And I'm going to choose SD card slot because I'm using that ProGrade SD card. I don't actually have a CF Express Type B card. Those cards are more expensive in some cases, but they're very fast and they're really good options, but I just don't happen to have one. So I'm going to do SD card, and yes. There we go, format complete, so we're good there. Now we need to set the date and time. Here is the language if you need to change the language. All right, so right here we got time zone and date. That's where we go to set the date and time. So if we go in there, I just go to date and time, and you can just go in there and set that. So 2024, 8/24 is the time of this review, and that time is actually wrong. So I'm gonna set that to the correct time. It's actually 8:10. So I'm gonna, in the morning, so I'm just gonna hit the OK button on the back of the camera. Remember the OK button I showed you earlier? Or you could tap the screen. It said OK on the bottom of the screen. You could tap that as well, and that will also work. Like, watch this. If I just hit OK, now we can just go back into the menu, and that's set. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here to the photo menu here. So like I said, there's just a couple of key things we need to set before we start using the camera. So here's the photo menu. So now you just got to go over to the right using the directional pad here on the back. You can go over to the right, or you could use the joystick on the back of the camera as well. So what we're going to do is just go over to the right, and then we're going to go down. Now we got file naming. You can go in here and change the names of the files. I recommend doing that. I would set it to like Z6 III or something is what I would recommend. Now, primary slot selection, I'm going to go in here and select SD card slot because that's my primary card slot. I'm not using a CF Express. Now, if you were using a CF Express card, I would definitely have that set to the primary, and I would have the SD card set to the secondary. So you can see here how you have secondary slot function. So you can have that set to overflow or backup. Now, when recording videos, you can't have it set to backup because you can't simultaneously write video files to both cards, only photo files. So hopefully Nikon will address that with a firmware update, but as it stands now, in photo mode, you can simultaneously write to both cards, but not video mode. Now, if we scroll down a little bit more, you have image quality. Now, I have it set to RAW. You guys might want to use the camera in JPEG mode because JPEGs you can easily share without having to process them. So if you just want to use JPEG mode, you can choose this option right here, JPEG HEIF fine. Or you can do RAW plus JPEG, which is a really good option if you want the best of both worlds. You have the RAW files if you really want to edit them, get the most dynamic range, because remember, RAW files are going to have more dynamic range, much more latitude when it comes to editing. The JPEGs are like a compressed, processed file. So the highlights and the shadows, for example, there's not going to be that much leeway. When you shoot RAW, you're going to have a lot more leeway with the highlights and shadows in particular. Also, when you shoot RAW, the image tends to be a lot flatter as far as color and contrast, so you can dial in the color and contrast, like saturation, to your liking. JPEG is like just turnkey, and you can just share it right to social media. You can't share RAW files to social media. You have to convert them to JPEGs first. Now, RAW recording, if you go in here, lossless compression would be like the best possible quality, but notice how there's that question mark on the top. Remember I told you about that question mark? So if we hit the zoom out button on the back of the camera, it has the little question mark next to it. And if you press that, you see how it brings up this information. So it says high efficiency with the star, high efficiency, file size increases, blah, blah, blah. So that gives you an explanation as to what that does. So I like using the high efficiency option. It's pretty much the same quality as lossless compression. Almost, but the file size is a lot smaller. So that's the option I'm going to go with. But if you want to save space, you can use the other high efficiency and it'll crush them a little more, I guess. But high efficiency with the star is the one I'm going to recommend and use. Now, ISO sensitivity, you could see a lot of this stuff is grayed out, and this is very powerful. So I'm going to show you this in the more advanced modes in a minute. All right, so now when we get down here, we have release mode. So release mode is basically how the camera is going to work when it comes to shooting when you press the shutter. So right now it's set to single frame, which means it'll do this. Just take one shot. Now we can change that. There's a button on the back of the camera, or you can get to it from the menu. But if we hit this button here and you hold it, you could then cycle through the different shots by turning the command dial. So you can see we have continuous low, and then you can change the number of shots that'll shoot, like per second type thing. So by default, it's set to 5. So now watch. So it'll take 5 frames per second. So then if we change that, we can put it to high or high plus, and then you have all these extended modes. So that'll be 30 frames, 60 frames, 120 frames, but that crops in, as you can see. See how it crops in a lot? But still, 120 frames is a pretty cool feature. And then we have self-timer. And again, notice when there's 2 rows there, that's when you can use the sub-command dial. So the sub-command dial will change the top row. So you have all these different self-timer options. 2 seconds is great if you're right next to the camera, but if you need to run and get in front of the camera, 10 seconds would be better. So that's how that works. And then I'll show you self-timer, and you can see how the AF illuminator lit there, just to let you know that the self-timer is there. And again, there's a button on the back, or you can get to that in the menu here in release modes. So I'm just going to put it back to single frame. And then here we have focus modes. So if we go in here, AFS is the default, but you also have continuous autofocus. Now this camera works so good in continuous autofocus, you might just want to leave it there. I tend to use single shot myself, AFS, AF single or whatever, because I like just focusing and then being able to reframe the shot. For example, if I focus on the eye there, I could then reframe the shot. And you see how the focus point stays? So this is a good way to like recompose. So I could focus on the subject and then recompose the image type thing. But then you could recompose and then take the shot like that, for example, and then the face is still sharp because that's where the focus point was. So AFS will lock when you press the shutter down. AFC won't do that. So let me show you what I mean. If I go into AFC continuous, now when you hold it down, it's just gonna kind of stick because I have facial recognition on. So it's just gonna be continuously autofocusing. If I put it over here, it's still focusing on the eye. So you can see here, now it's focusing on the C-stand in the back. If I move it over, it's gonna switch to the face. I'm just holding the shutter button down here and the focus is just locked. So that's continuous. And if you go into the eye menu, guys, by hitting the eye button on the back of the camera, you also can change it here. So if I go here, you can change it to AFC or manual focus. So that's where that is. So back into the menu here, we have AF area, and by default, I would just leave it on this wide area, especially if you're in full auto mode, but you can narrow down those areas by scrolling through the different options. And notice how 3D tracking is grayed out, full auto mode. So you can go in here and you can change, they're just different size boxes pretty much. All right, so if we go into the eye menu here and we select AF area, you have two different rows here. You have subject detection, which you can change. So right now this is set to auto, but you have human, animal, automobile, airplane, or off. So I'm just leaving that on full auto now and it'll kind of choose between. But if you go up here to the top, this is your AF area. So this AF area is basically the entire screen. So it's going to use the whole screen to focus. So if there's a face on the right, like you saw a minute ago, it's going to grab that face. But you could limit the focus area. You can make it smaller if you want. So if you scroll over, you have this custom option and you have another custom option. If we keep going, we have wide, large. Let me show you what that looks like. So you see that red box? That's going to now limit the focus to just that red box. So that's pretty cool. It won't focus on anything outside the box pretty much. It really helps limit what you're doing. So if there's like a lot of people, but you need to focus on somebody, you know, on the frame and you don't want it picking up the other people, you can limit the focus by choosing a smaller focus area. And that's what this option does. And then you have pinpoint, or you have this really small focus area here. You could see it's very tiny. Just that little red box, so you can really get exactly where you want to focus. And then you have an even smaller one, which is just incredible how small that focus point is. Tiny little red dot there. So notice here the custom one, and we could actually change that. If you hold the OK button down, it'll bring you into this area. And this is what the custom looks like. So you can see it's this skinny little rectangle, which depending on what you're doing, you might want to limit the focus to that skinny little rectangle. But you can change it by going up, down, and left and right. So I'm just going to make it a larger box. Something that looks actually pretty good. Something like that. That's very similar to the focus mode that I use on the Sony cameras, which is called zone focus. It's a pretty large box in the center area. So I'm going to set it like that for my custom one. And that's what I'm going to use just for now. But I just wanted to show you how you can change custom 1 and custom 2 to your liking. Now custom 2 by default is this vertical mode. Now this is a pretty interesting mode. So this might be perfect if you're like a wedding photographer and you're like looking down the aisle. For example, like you don't want it focusing on any of the people, you just want it focusing on the bride and groom at the end of the aisle type thing. This would be a pretty cool option for that. So there's use cases for this stuff and you can customize the custom options for your needs. Very, very cool. I love how Nikon handled the focus area customization like that. That's a really sweet way to handle it in my opinion. So I'm just going to put that back to AF large for now. So I just wanted to show you a couple of settings that we needed to change for video, and then I'll show you how to use the camera a little bit more. So if we scroll down here, we have video file type. So if we go over to the right, we have H.265 10-bit. That's pretty much the best option without the files being too big, in my opinion. So you also have ProRes here, and ProRes HQ, 12-bit, and then NRAW. Those three are massive file sizes, but they will yield you better quality. The RAW is incredible that this camera can do internal RAW like that, but it comes with more skill, more processing, and huge file sizes. So I tend to use this option here, H.265 SDR. And then notice here on the bottom where it says tone mode, if you go over to the right, this is where you can change it to HLG, which stands for HDR displays and stuff, and then you have N-Log. So SDR will basically process the images very similar to how a JPEG works. Think about it like that. I'm trying to really like simplify it. So SDR will record video, but it'll process it for you, contrast and stuff like that, where it'll like look really good. That's what SDR does. HLG is compatible with a special HDR monitor and stuff, so I don't really use that feature. N-Log is kind of similar to shooting raw quality when you're taking photos. So N-Log will look much more flat. You're going to have to process the video footage. It's not the same as RAW because this camera actually does RAW video as well. RAW video is much more powerful. You can actually change the white balance after the fact when shooting RAW video. But in N-Log, it's kind of like raw photos where it just looks flat and you have to process it. You basically have to grade the footage, it's called, in a video editing program like Final Cut Pro or DaVinci Resolve. A lot of people are using that these days. And Nikon and DaVinci kind of have a deal going or something. So that's kind of what you have to use pretty much if you're shooting RAW with the Nikon as far as I understand it. But anyways, I'm just using SDR. So I just wanted to make you aware of where N-Log is. And by the way, N-Log is the same thing as C-Log for Canon and S-Log for Sony, in case you're unaware. So if we go down here, we have frame size and frame rate. So if we go over to the right, this is the 6K 24p option, which is what I use most. So it's 6K video, which is just awesome. So you get more cropping, you can zoom in more and maintain that 4K quality, for example, when using 6K. And you can go all the way up to 6K 60, which is incredible. Now, if we scroll down here, you can see how the resolution changes. So when it changes to 3840, that's 4K. So now we're at 4K 120, which is very cool that it does that. And we have 4K 100, 4K 60, all the way down. And now here we're in HD. So this is, 1080p HD. And this is where you can shoot 240 frames per second, which is very cool. And you got 120 and all the other options down there. So I'm just going to leave this to the 6K 24. That's like the best quality that I would recommend using because why not? 6K is awesome. If you don't want to fill up your memory card, you can lower it to 4K 24, for example. Now, video quality, we want that set to high for sure. And then we have the subject detection. You can change that to put it on auto. Vibration reduction is on. External record for HDMI, in case you guys are using an HDMI monitor or something like that, like a Ninja, and you want to externally record, you can do that and enable it there. So now video is pretty much set up. So if we switch the camera to video mode, you could see now we have the audio meters down here, and you could see up here some of the settings. It says on the SD card how long we can record for. So we're looking at 42 minutes at this particular setting on this particular card. You can focus by hitting the focus button, and if we hit the video record button, it's going to start recording. And you can see we have this nice record screen. We can zoom in, zoom out. See, the autofocus works very good. Now you can also just touch, and the focus will change, which works really well. And that's the basics of recording video. Now let me just put it back into photo mode because I want to show you there's a couple of other features here. Notice how there's this icon. It looks like a little hand touching the screen. That is touch shutter. So you can just touch the screen and it'll focus and take the shot. Now if you press that little icon, you can turn it off. You can toggle. So now this is just moving the focus point. So if I go like that, the red box moves. Notice how the focus point moved? So that's what the touch option is doing now. Now if we set it, you could also use the joystick, by the way, to move that. Now if we press it again, it's going to be touch AF. So touch AF, if you move it around, it'll just focus where you click pretty much, as you can see here. And if we hit it one more time, it's now back to touch shutter. And it'll just take the shot for you. And again, in full auto mode, if we go to the I menu here, this is where you have some options. You can change your JPEG size, medium, small if you want. We're shooting RAW, so it's not going to affect anything. But down here, you got custom controls shooting. You have vibration reduction. That's for, you know, the sensor stabilization and so forth. You can go in there. And you have sport mode on and off. So I'm just going to leave that on. It's cool that it's got a sport mode as well. And a lot of this other stuff is grayed out, like picture control, white balance. We can't use that in full auto mode. And we also, by the way, have skin softening down here. This is a cool feature. It'll make your skin look smoother, so you might want to do that if you're taking portraits and stuff like that. All right, guys, so one other thing I wanted to show you is the function 2 button here, which is on the front of the camera. I'll show you a little picture of it so it's easier to see, but you can see I'm hitting it with my finger here. There's 2 buttons next to the lens. The one on the bottom is what I'm pressing. And watch what happens on the top of the LCD screen. You can see how the AFS lights up. So the focus mode and focus area lights up. So what's so cool about this is when you turn the dials, you can change this stuff. So you see how the focus area is changing with the sub command dial. Now watch what happens when I press the main command dial. It's going to change from AFC to manual focus to AFS. See that? So you can cycle through these just by hitting this button and turning these dials. You don't have to go into any menus or anything. So I love the way that Nikon handles this type of like ergonomics and use cases. It's just so much easier to just press a button and turn the dials than it is to go into the menu, select this, select that. So very big fan of that. Now the top button on the back, I actually have custom configured to go into my menu. So this is the my menu area, and I have a whole bunch of settings in here that I just find I want quick access to because they're kind of deep in the menu and I want to be able to change this stuff quickly. So I have it set to that top function 1 button. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. All right, guys, so now I'm going to switch the camera into a more powerful mode here. So I'm going to put it into program auto mode. And now if we hit the I menu, you can see how this stuff is not grayed out. So now we have the option to change the white balance. So you have a bunch of different options in here, and notice how underneath the A1 there's a little down arrow, and you can see here it says details. So if you hit down on the pad, you have keep overall atmosphere, keep warm lighting colors, or keep white, so reduce warming colors. So you have 3 different autos. I actually like the keep overall atmosphere option, so that's what I have selected. So just to continue on white balance, I showed you the auto white balance options, but you have a bunch of other options in here. You got natural light auto, and this is where you can go and manipulate the colors and stuff like that if you want. But you also have, you know, direct sunlight, and again, you can adjust these things, which is very, very cool. And if you hit the I button again, it'll go back. So you got direct sunlight, you got cloudy, shade, incandescent, and so forth. You got Kelvin, so this you can actually dial in your number by the actual color temperature. And then you have presets here, so this would be where your custom white balances are, and you have a whole bunch you can load up in there, which is, again, very powerful. Now here you have set picture control. Here's where all your like JPEG basically processing presets are. So think about your JPEG files and how the camera is going to like process them and make them look for you. You can go in here and you can select all these different options. You have standard, neutral, vivid, monochrome, flat monochrome, deep tone monochrome, portrait, rich tone portrait, landscape, and then you have all these other options. You got another flat, dream, morning, pop, Sunday, somber, dramatic, silence, bleached. I don't even know how to pronounce that. Pure, denim, toy, sepia, blue, red, pink, charcoal, graphite, binary. I can't believe how many options there are. Carbon. So that's all the different like creative styles is what it's called on Sony cameras. So here it's called picture control. So that's very cool. And in the menu, you can actually custom configure those picture controls and save them as user presets. So you can like manipulate them if you want and dial them in to your liking. And so you could really get the look you want. Now also over here, we have metering modes. So if we go in there, this is where you can change the camera metering. Now what metering means is how the camera figures out how to expose for the scene. So remember, the camera's like figuring out exposure, it's doing all these things. So metering mode is the tool to manipulate how the camera exposes for the scene. So matrix metering is going to use the entire sensor with a little bit of emphasis on the center area. Center weighted metering, notice how the screen changed color drastically. Now the camera is prioritizing the center area, so that's why it got a little bit brighter, because the center of the screen is the background. If I turn it a little bit this way, you can see it's going to get a little darker when it sees the face or whatever. You can see it gets brighter there. Then we have highlight weight metering. So highlight is going to make sure that none of the highlights clip. So highlight metering is a really cool feature because you could use it when you do not want the highlights to clip. And a situation where that would be is if you're actually taking photos of something really bright. Think about like a light bulb, something like that, or like really frothy like white water, but you want the white exposed, like not clipping. You know, that's where you would use highlight metering mode. You could actually manipulate it with exposure comp as well. And of course, in full manual mode, you can manipulate the shutter speed to control exposure. But again, we're in program auto mode. So this is a way to do it using the tools on the camera, you know, without having to know so much. So that's what metering modes do. And again, spot metering is just limiting it to a pretty small spot in the center. And it's just going to meter for that. So again, spot metering is just a small area in the center. And if I focus on the background, you can see how bright it gets because it's trying to expose for that dark area back there. But it's just the very center area that it's going to use. So I'm just going to put that back on matrix metering, like so. All right, guys, so now that we're in program auto mode here, remember I told you the button on the bottom here, the function 2 button, how it's lighting up the autofocus mode and the autofocus area here. And then when we turn the command dials, you can change that stuff. So watch what happens when I keep turning this. See how it says 3D now? That was grayed out in full auto mode. So in 3D mode, it'll basically track. So you can just lock onto something and you can see how it's now tracking the edge. So watch, if I focus on the background here, it'll lock. It's not really a good subject. If I focus on right here, see how it's staying stuck to that? That's 3D tracking mode. That's what 3D tracking does. And it works really well. I actually have it custom programmed to the AF on button. So it'll just automatically go to 3D tracking when I hit the AF on button. I'll show you how to do that if you want to change your settings as well. But anyways, if I just go through here, I can change that back to custom 1, which is what I like, that nice large red area there. All right, so going back in the menu here, guys, there's a couple other things I wanted to show you here. Active dynamic lighting. So if you go in here, you can turn that on. And what that will do is, it doesn't really affect anything if you're shooting RAW, but on your JPEG files, it does matter. So what it'll do is it'll like try to help keep the highlights from clipping, and it'll add like boost to the shadow areas. So it'll just basically fill in the shadows with a little bit of extra light. So it's pretty cool because it does that automatically for you. And if you're a JPEG shooter, that it really makes sense. You might want to have this on. So, but because I'm shooting RAW, I just leave it off for the most part. That's how I like to use it. But I just wanted to show you that because, you know, it is a cool feature. And you remember before when I was telling you how you can customize your picture controls, this is where you can go and do that. If you just go over to the right, these are the creative styles, and you can actually go in here. Like, let's just say I pick neutral for an example. If I go over to the right, these are the settings that the camera has preset for. See how when I get close to the EVF, it's turning the monitor off? Remember how I was telling you that? That's that sensor on the top. So anyways, here are the settings that are set for neutral. But you could go in here and manipulate this stuff, guys. That's what I wanted to show you. And then you can save it to your own preset. And that's where that is. So this is where photo flicker reduction is. This is if the, you know, you're in like LED light situations and you're seeing the flickering on the screen, you can go in here and turn this on. Down here is where the more advanced photo modes are that you might want to use. So auto bracketing, for example, is how you would take HDR photography and you could spread the exposures out. So that's a really powerful feature, and you can go in here and have it set. This is how I have it set for 3 frames, and I notice how I have it set to auto exposure. I just want it auto exposure bracketing though. I don't want the flash option. But you can also have it set for white balance, flash bracketing. ADL bracketing is basically the dynamic optimizer option, so it'll do a couple of different versions of that. So like I said, I have it set for exposure right here, and that will basically take 3 shots. So you go to the right to turn it on, right to turn it off. And by right, I just mean the directional pad on the back next to the OK button. So this is multiple exposure. This will basically combine multiple images and give you different looks. It's a pretty cool feature, and you have a couple of different ways you can do that. Overlay shooting, average mode, there's a couple of different modes in here. HDR overlay is kind of like an auto HDR. You have to use this in JPEG mode, and it'll basically, you can go in here and set the strength and stuff like that. And you can save individual pictures as RAW files if you want, but the auto HDR will be a combined file. So again, this is for JPEG shooters mostly, and this is a cool feature if you just want to do auto HDR. It works really well. You know, it'll rapid fire a couple of shots and then combine them on the camera for you and give you like that more dynamic range final look. Now we have interval shooting here. This is for time-lapse photography. So you can go in here and you have tons and tons of options to configure for that feature, which is really sweet. And then we have time-lapse video. So you can go in here and you can adjust that for a time-lapse video if you want to do that. Now we have focus shift shooting. So this is basically focus stacking. So this is great for macro photography. You can go in here and you can set how many shots you're going to take, how much of a focus depth, and again, very powerful. You have a lot of features in here to manage that feature. And again, this is great for macro shooters. So this camera has a lot of built-in features for different types of photography genres, which is really nice. Pixel shift shooting doesn't work. I'm just gonna take this off self-timer. And now we have pixel shift shooting. So some options will be grayed out depending on how you have the camera configured. So keep that in mind. You can't have self-timer with pixel shift shooting. So you can turn this on and off here. So this will basically move the sensor around just a little bit and it'll give you an insanely high resolution image. All right, guys, so I just wanted to show you a couple other features that are kind of specific to photography. So if we go down into the custom settings menu and we go down into shooting display, if we scroll down here, we have pre-release capture options. Now this is an incredibly powerful feature for, in particular, like wildlife photographers, I would say, or depending on what you're doing, anything that requires you to possibly get photos before you hit the shutter speed. Why I say wildlife is because birds taking off of a branch is like one of the best examples I could think of. You never really know when the bird's going to leave. So if you're just sitting waiting, by the time you press the shutter, the bird already left. So pre-capture will get the bird leaving. You can also use it for, you know, any type of action, you know, if something, fireworks or some kind of stunt that you're doing, pre-capture will really help with stuff like that. Now, if we keep scrolling down, this is where shutter type is. So you might want to change the camera to mechanical shutter. That's where this option is. I just wanted to make you aware of that. I'm leaving it in auto for the most part, but now auto works really well and you need to have it in auto for some of the more advanced features, just so you know. So if something's not working, you might have to change the shutter type back to auto or electronic, for example. I just like leaving it on auto because it'll solve those problems for you. Now, if we scroll down a little bit more, we have this starlight view. See this option? This is for those astrophotographers out there. So this will make it a lot easier to see in low light situations. So it doesn't just apply to astrophotography, but that's why they're calling it starlight view. So enable that if you need to. If you can't see the screen in very low light conditions, that will help a lot. Now, one other thing I wanted to show you is in here, we have an option for silent mode. So if we scroll down here, it's in the setup area. See this silent mode option? So you can turn that on and off by just hitting the right directional pad and it'll turn it off. So that's where silent mode is if you guys need that feature. Sometimes you need the camera to be silent. There it is. Now, a couple other things I just wanted to show you quickly was in this controls area, because remember I told you I changed a few things. So if you go into controls and you go into custom eye menu, I didn't change anything in here, but this is where you can change stuff in your eye menu. And depending on how you like to utilize the camera, you might want to change some of this stuff out. It is possible I changed something here. I think the airplane mode was here, but I put skin smoothing. So if you click in here, this is where you can go and change it. So I have it set to skin softening, but you can change that to something else. I think it was set to airplane mode by default. Sorry about that. Just go back. So if we go down and we go into shooting controls, now these are all the different buttons that we can change. So you can see here the function 1 button has that little icon there with the lines and the check. That is the My Menu button. So again, if I hit that button, it'll bring you right into My Menu, where I can get to monitor brightness, for example, or auto HDR mode, or format the memory card. So I like that a lot. Now over here, I just wanted to show you how I changed the AF on button. See that AF on, how it says 3D? So if we select it by hitting the OK button, you can go in here, go over to the right, and I have it set for 3D tracking. So if you watch, when I focus, it's just, you know, focusing. It's in continuous autofocus right now. But if I hit the AF on button, you see how it changed to the 3D right there on the top? And it brings up just that little point. So now I have AF tracking just by the push of a button. So I can just focus normally like so with this box. So it'll limit the focus to just the red area. But if I just want to suddenly start tracking something, I can hit the AF on button and it'll start tracking. Just hold it and you can see it's going to track that subject. And now it's going to track that little ball head, see? Works really well. You can just take photos, it's tracking it. One other thing I wanted to show you guys while we're in photo mode here is if I hit the display button on the back of the camera, watch how it cycles through the different displays. See how all that information went away? And now we have the auto leveler, so you can see if the camera's level or not. And we got the histogram there, which is pretty sweet. If I hit display again, now we have nothing. So this is a nice clean screen if that's what you're looking for. Now this is just like a quick settings screen, so you can see how the camera is configured, all the different basic options. And now another thing I wanted to show you is this ISO button. Notice when I hold the ISO button down, it lights up here and it turns yellow. Now if you hold the ISO button down and you turn the front sub command dial, see how the auto goes away? So now I'm just in straight up ISO 100. So you can see my shutter speed just went to 1 second because it's pretty dark in here. So that's pretty much how that works. So you can turn the auto on and off, and now if I hold the ISO button down and turn the dial, I can configure the ISO however I need to get that shutter speed where I need it. That's how that works. So if I hold this down again and do the sub command dial, it's now back in auto ISO. And that's how that works. And notice how my shutter speed is really fast at 1/500th of a second. That's because I need to show you another feature. If we go into the menu here and we go back up into photo, ISO sensitivity settings. This is where some powerful stuff is, guys. So this is where you can set your maximum sensitivity with flash. So if we go over to the right, we can raise this up even more. If you want, these are expandable, so you can go all the way up to these if you really want to. But 64 is good enough for my purposes. But if you need more, this is where you can go. But what I wanted to show you here was the minimum shutter speed option. This is where you can go and set the minimum shutter speed. This is awesome. If you're using aperture priority mode and you want a minimum shutter speed because you're like shooting sports or something, this is where you can go and configure that. This is also where you can go if you have shaky hands and you need to raise it. But because this camera has the sensor stability and stuff like that, you can get away with much lower shutter speeds than you might realize, as long as there's nothing moving in front of the, scene. Like if you have static subjects, nothing's moving, you can handhold with a pretty slow shutter. Goes all the way to 30 seconds, and it'll go all the way up to 8,000th of a second, or you can just leave it on auto. So I'm just going to leave it on auto for now. And when you're in auto, you have this option. You have slower or faster. So I tend to just leave it in auto mode for the most part, but I had it at 1/500th because I was taking photos with the 200 to 600 millimeter lens. I was using this cool adapter, which I actually just made a video on, and this allows you to put Sony lenses on Nikon cameras, and it actually works really well. I was impressed, very impressed. I didn't expect it to work as good as it did. But if you guys are coming from Sony because this camera is so awesome, you might want to use some of your Sony lenses on the Nikon, and with that adapter you can. So I'll have that linked below if you guys want to check out that video. It's really, really cool. But anyways, that's why the shutter speed was at 1/500th of a second, because I was using that monster lens. But anyways, you can manipulate the shutter speed here. So watch, if I set it to -2, for example, and now we look, you can see the shutter speed's at 1/20th of a second. So it's much slower, right? Great for low light. If you have it on a little desk tripod like I do, you're using self-timer, you get cleaner images because the ISO will be lower. See how the ISO is at 2200 right now? So now watch when we go in here and we change it Let's put it at +2, for example. See, now we're at 1/320th of a second, which is a pretty significantly fast shutter speed. So you can see the ISO is now at 36,000. So to get that faster shutter speed, we're going to have to raise the sensor sensitivity quite a bit. So like I said, I tend to leave this in the middle, and that's deciding on 1/80th of a second with this camera, with this lens at 70mm. Now watch when I go to 24mm. See how it's slowed down? So it's kind of matching the focal length, which makes sense. You want the shutter speed to be at least what the focal length of the lens is like the general rule of thumb. So that's what the camera is kind of choosing to do automatically with this feature. So again, it's a very powerful feature, and I wanted to make sure you guys understand it inside and out because it's very, very useful in a lot of situations. Now, again, if we're looking at the screen here, guys, you have a lot of information on the screen. You can see over here on the left what the shutter is set to. Remember before it was set to mechanical. Now it has an A there. You got your metering modes down here. You have what the current monitor settings are. It's telling you there. It tells you which camera mode you're in, aperture priority. Then you have your shutter release. It's single shot, autofocus mode, continuous. And then we have the autofocus area. You have your subject detection option there. You have your white balance. You have your JPEG processing picture mode. Then you have RAW. Full FX stands for full frame. Then you have your I menu. There's a button there that you can click to get to the I menu if you want, because remember, it's a touch screen. Then you have your battery life. Now down here is how many shots you have remaining, or how many shots you can fit on the memory card. That's what that is. And then again, ISO, you have your aperture here, and you have shutter speed. So if you want to change your aperture in aperture priority mode, you can just turn the sub command dial. And that will change the aperture. See that? So now if we switch the camera to shutter priority mode, you see how that box moved? Check out how that box moves. See how that little box moves from aperture to shutter speed? That's because you can touch it. So you can touch the box also and change the shutter speed that way. But notice now if I turn the sub command dial, it doesn't do anything. That's because shutter is set to the larger main command dial. So now I'm turning the larger command dial, and it is changing the shutter speed. So that's how that works. Very, very cool. Now, if we put the camera into full manual mode, we have aperture on the sub command dial, and we have shutter speed on the main command dial. So that's how manual mode works. Very, very cool. I really like how this is set up in that way. Just going to go back to aperture priority mode. All right, guys, so while we're in full manual mode, I wanted to show you a couple of special features here that are, powerful, but the only way you can get to them is in manual mode. So if we just lower the time and we go all the way down to like 30 seconds and beyond, now we have bulb mode. So bulb mode will basically, when you press the shutter button down, you have to hold it, and it'll take the exposure for as long as you hold the button down. So that was the shot. Now, if we go one more, we have timer. So timer is cool because you just press the shutter button, and now the timer will count. So you can see here on the command panel how the timer is counting. So that's how that works. So you'll know how long the exposure is. And then if I press the shutter button again, it'll stop the timer. And again, guys, this is the main command dial here, and this is the sub command dial. So you can see now, again, how I'm changing the aperture and I'm changing the shutter. So that's time mode, bulb mode, and then that goes back to 30 seconds, and we can bring it all the way back to whatever shutter speed we want. So I'm just going to put it in aperture priority mode. All right. All right, guys, so now I'm going to put the camera in video mode here, and I'm going to go into the menu, and I want to go over and down to video mode and show you a couple of features in here. You have the very similar options to photo mode. A lot of these are very similar. So file naming, again, you could name the camera if you want. You can go in here and set it to Z6 III, for example, or whatever you want to do. Now you have destination, so this is where you can set it for whatever card you want. Like I said, I have it set to the SD card, and it'll tell you how much time you can record with your current record settings on that particular card. So that's what that does. Now video type, we already set this, but this is where all the different video options are for the different formats. And again, you have MP4. If you want your video footage, this is a lower quality, but this format you can just share. So if you record in this format, you can just copy it to your iPad and upload it to YouTube or Facebook or whatever. No processing is needed. This is like a friendly format for devices to read. If you guys are using the more advanced options, like the move options here and the 10-bit, that might not play on your iPad. It might not play on your phone. It's like an advanced codec, they call it. And you kind of need a video editing program to use those features. So I just wanted to explain that a little bit further here as we get more advanced with this camera. So if you guys are shooting N-Log, this is like a dual base ISO sensor. So it has ISO 800 and then ISO 6400 would be the second base ISO, and it cleans up quite a bit at 6400 compared to like 6000, for example. So it is a pretty high second base ISO, but it's really helpful in those low light situations. All right, so one other option I wanted to show you for the N-Log shooters is the view assist. So if you go into the G setup area, you go to G for video, and if you go down to G11, you have the view assist option. You can turn that on, and that will just help you visually see what the exposure kind of looks like, because when you're shooting an N-Log, it looks very flat, extremely flat. Here's an example I shot with Layla just testing it. You can see how flat it looks. So that's what N-Log looks like. So if you turn this on, when you look at the screen, it'll look more like what it normally looks like. So you can check the exposures and stuff. It's a little easier. That's what View Assist is for, and it's great when using N-Log. By the way, if you guys are more advanced video users and you're shooting RAW and stuff like that, my buddy Josh Satin created an excellent video on the Z6 III in regards to that. So I highly recommend checking that out. I'll have that linked below as well for those more advanced like RAW shooters and stuff. He goes into great detail with noise reduction, all sorts of stuff like that. This is a beginner's guide, so I'm not going that far in this video. All right, guys, so when recording video, you can also manipulate the picture control. So this is, again, where you can go and change the way it looks. So it might be easier if you set it to neutral, for example, so you don't have too much color and saturation baked into the video file. This will give you more leeway when it comes to grading. So it just depends. If you're looking for a turnkey option, you know, you can go in here and you can like play with this stuff and get like the look that you like. And then when you record video, you're gonna have very little grading work to do. So it's just a way to, you know, get more power out of the camera and really help you speed up your workflow. If you can get it correct on camera, you know, try to get it correct on camera. Now you can go down here, and again, this is where you can make those custom picture controls. You can go in here and make custom ones if you want. Again, dialing it in for that special look that you guys might want. Now you got active lighting. This one I actually have set to low. So when you're recording video, it'll just help lift the shadows a little bit because I'm not shooting RAW, remember. I'm not shooting N-Log. I'm just shooting regular SDR. So it's, again, kind of like JPEG for photos. So I do want to fill in a little bit on the shadows. So I have that set to low. And I find that that works pretty good. Now, a couple other features for video I wanted to show you are in the setup area. So if we go down here into the setup menu, so this is where you can set the monitor brightness, which is extremely helpful, especially when it's bright outside, like when it's really sunny. It's so hard to see the screen sometimes. So you can go in here and change the brightness. And the screen gets pretty darn bright. You can see high 2 is very bright. By default, it looks like this. So helpful feature, and that's why I added this to my menu, because I use that a lot when I'm outside when I need to use the LCD screen. Otherwise, I'll use the electronic viewfinder. It's a non-issue. This viewfinder is so awesome and so bright that if you can use that, for photos and stuff. But a lot of times when doing video, I prefer using the LCD screen, you know, and I can't get my eye to the viewfinder. So monitor brightness is a great tool for that. Now, another option in here, if we scroll down, we have the auto temperature cutout. You're going to want that set to high. And again, the camera will just get hotter before it turns off if you have it set to high. So I recommend doing that so you can record for longer periods of time. Now this will clean the image sensor. It just will use the stabilization to shake the sensor, and it works pretty good. Pixel mapping, I recommend doing this every once in a while. This will just analyze the sensor and optimize it. Sometimes there might be like a dead pixel or things like that. It'll like optimize the sensor to make sure that you're going to get the best image quality possible. So I recommend doing pixel mapping every once in a while. So now if we go up here into the G area for video, We have a couple of different options in here I wanted to show you. Let's just scroll up here. So AF speed. If we go in here, we can actually change the autofocus speed when recording video. So if you're doing a focus transition, basically it's like how fast will the focus transition go. You can have it like really quick or you can have it go really slow. Depends what you're doing. If you're tracking moving subjects, you might want it a little bit faster. If you just want a nice cinematic slow, focus transition, you can set it to really slow. And that's how that works. And then you have more options here, only when recording or always. So if you're not even recording, the autofocus speed will be slower if you have it set to always. Or you could just set it to record only, which is, it's cool that that's an option. Now AF tracking sensitivity, again, I have this set to 4. So this is just going to be how sticky the autofocus is. So if you have it set to high, it's going to be highly likely to switch from one subject to another. If you have it set to low, it's going to be more locked on your subject, like it won't be so sensitive. So if it's jumping around too much on you, you can change this option and try to dial that in a little bit. So this is where you can go to turn on extended shutter speeds if you want. View assist, we already talked about that. Now zebra pattern, this is where you can go to turn that on and set the thresholds and stuff. This is a great tool for exposing correctly, properly for when using N-Log and stuff like that. You can use zebras and the zebras will like light up when you're using like a gray card to check exposure. And it's a very powerful tool if you really need to dial in the exposure and get it like perfect. You can also use zebras to show when the highlights are clipping or when the shadows are clipping, depending on how you want to use it. So it's a very nice exposure tool. Now, this is a really powerful feature, brightness information display. I have it set to waveform. See that? So if I hit the display button here, it'll cycle through the different displays. Now I got waveform. Waveform is super cool because it shows you the exposure in like a more advanced way. And you could easily see if stuff's clipping on the top there, and if you're blowing out the shadows on the bottom. So you can change that to a smaller version, or you can have it set to the histogram. So the histogram works pretty good too. You can see here, like because my iPad is here, like it looks like it's clipped on the right-hand side. If I move my iPad out of the way, you'll see how the exposure changes. So now it's just clipping because of the light on the top, on the very top right. If I move it like this, you'll see the histogram change. See that? So it's basically just a visual indication of what the exposure is doing. And like I said, waveform is great for video. When you're shooting in N-Log in particular, it's very helpful. Now to see the brightness information, what I had to do was go in here and custom monitor shooting display. I had to change display 4 to show brightness. So you could see how there's a set option. So if you go over to the right, this is where you can set that. And I had to check this. This wasn't checked by default. So if you enable it, like I wasn't able to cycle and see the histogram when I hit the display button. So I had to actually customize it here. So that's why I'm showing you that. Make sure you do that if you want to see the brightness information when you cycle through the display modes. And you can do the same thing for the viewfinder. So you can see these are the 3 different default options. So notice how the brightness information is not there. So we can go in here and we can change it and add the brightness information. So now when you look through the electronic viewfinder and you cycle through the display options for the viewfinder, you'll see the brightness as one of them. All right, so one more thing I need to show you is the playback area. So if you hit the playback button on the back of the camera, it will bring you into the playback area. And again, if you hit the display button, guys, it works in the playback area as well. So this will show all the different information. Let me get to a different photo here. So again, if I hit the display button here and we cycle through, we have all these different options. So we have an RGB histogram, which is very nice. It's nice to know each channel that's exposed. So you'll know if you're clipping the reds, for example. And if we cycle through, this gives us all the information. So you can see all the different camera settings that were set. And this is just a clean view so you can see. And then again, guys, we could zoom in and zoom out with these buttons on the bottom of the camera. And now we can cycle through the images by just turning the sub command dial or the main command dial. And if you keep zooming out, it'll turn into a thumbnail view and it'll get even smaller like so. And you can see here that this one's a video file because it has that little icon on it. If we go a little bit bigger, you can't see the icon now, but you can see the seconds. So if I zoom in a little more, now we can just hit the OK button and it'll play. Record button, it's going to start recording. So now it's playing the video file. And you can hear the audio coming out of the little speaker on the top of the camera. Alright, so if we scroll down in the menu here, this is the playback area. And you have a bunch of different options in the playback area. I have everything right now set to default. Picture review, though, I wanted to show you this because if you turn this on, it'll, after you take a photo, the picture will come up on the screen for a minute for you to look at, or a couple of seconds, not a minute. But that's turned off by default. So if you want that, after you take a photo, it show up on the screen for a second for you to see, you can enable that here. Now, if we scroll down one more, again, this is the setup menu. This is where you can go to format your memory card, save user settings. So once you configure the camera how you want, you can go in here and save user settings to U1, and you can see up here on the mode dial, you have U1, U2, and U3. So those are your settings that you can save. I saved the camera settings to U1, you know, just so I had it like kind of backed up sort of thing. I could always go to U1 and know that the settings are going to be correct. For example, like if I'm playing with the camera, it'll go back to where I definitely want it. You got reset user settings, language, and so forth. Now in here is the network menu, and this is where you can go and you can turn on the airplane mode if you want, and that'll help save battery life and so forth. But you have a lot of options in here. Nikon image cloud, connect to smart device. Very similar to the Sony cameras and the Canon cameras in that regard. That's pretty cool. It's got the Atmos Bluetooth options built in here. USB control, so you can decide what the USB port's going to do. Router frequencies, MAC address. Now if we go down here, this is the My Menu area, and I highly recommend you guys use this area, especially once you start using the camera. You're going to change some settings around, and it's kind of hard to find some of the settings unless you could just have a photographic memory and you can figure out where they are. But if you're coming from a different camera system, it's hard to remember that stuff. So I added a bunch of stuff into the My Menu area. So if you scroll down, by default, the My Menu area is just going to look like pretty much like this. It's going to have add items, remove items, rank items, and choose tab. So anyways, if you just go to add items here and you go to the right, it gives you all the different menu options. So you have the basic menu options here. So you can just pick which one you want. So like, oh, photo menu. Yeah, I want to go in there. And then it gives you a bunch of options. So you can go in here and add what you think you need. And that's what I did. And you can see how they're checked. So these are the options that I have added to my menu. And you could copy these if you want, guys. I don't care. That's why I'm showing you this. So you have all different options in here that you can add. Skin softening, flicker reduction, auto bracketing, interval timer, time-lapse, pixel shift shooting, and so forth. So that's how you go about doing that. And if you go back, you can go to your video recording menu, custom settings menu. So if you look here, I got skin softening, I got autofocus speed, so I can change that autofocus transition speed really easily if I want. I can change my video file type if I want. I can go in here and change that. This is where I can enable N-Log if I want to use N-Log quickly. Very easy to get to now. Frame rate, I can go in here and change my frame rate to like 60p or 120p, for example, really quick. So when in photo mode, again, if I hit this top button, it brings me right into my menu. But if I put the camera into video mode and I hit the top button, it's going to default to white balance because that's what function 1 is by default. So you can change that for video mode and have it go to my menu. Let me show you how to do that. If you go into the menu here. All right, so if we go into video, G here, we can go to custom controls. And now we can change that function button from white balance to whatever we want. And in my case, I'm going to choose the My Menu area. So I just got to scroll through here and find that. Right here, My Menu, there we go. And now you can see function 1 is set to My Menu. Now, I wanted to show you this other thing that I didn't show you. So some lenses will have custom buttons, or you might want to change the focus ring to do something and so forth. This is where you can go and manipulate that stuff. And again, it's the same for photo and video. So you can go in here and change a lot of different things, which is pretty darn cool. A lot of customization with this camera, guys. So now in video mode, if I hit the function button, it'll go right into my menu instead of white balance, which is what I want. And that's how you would go and configure that stuff. All right, guys, that about wraps up this video. I really hope you got what you were looking for, and I'm super excited for you. This is an awesome camera, and I really feel like this video should get you up and running for both photos and videos, especially if you're a beginner. But if you have questions, guys, in the comments section, be sure to ask, fire away. I'm more than happy to help. If you found this video helpful, it'd be super cool if you give me a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that, but it'd be even cooler if you hit that subscribe button as well. In the description area, I got all the links set up for you, so you can click on the links, related videos and stuff like that, all down there. The gear I use, for example, it's all in the description area for you. If you want to check that out, I'd appreciate it. Also, don't forget BH Photo. Thanks again for letting me borrow the camera. I will catch up with you next time. All right, guys, take care.